Okay, here we go. I wish there was better things to talk about than 50 series issues, but that's what we do around here. We make videos to hopefully inform people and help people. And given the fact that I am seeing a lot of people still asking questions in the like 7 or 8 different Facebook groups I belong to. Yeah, Facebook, I know. I guess it's a thing again, obviously. But people asking, is 50 series worth it? Are these problems real? What's everyone's thought on 50 series? So we're gonna talk about this again, but what I'm gonna do today is I'm gonna kind of like mash up like I'm gonna make like a meatball of all of the known stuff right now that is kind of on the negative side of things when it comes to 50 series. So buckle up. Actually, you should still be buckled up from 40 series, I guess, technically. For those looking for a high-end custom gaming experience, look no further than Falcon Northwest. Falcon Northwest has been building PCs made for gamers for over 30 years with a focus on a true high-end gaming experience. Custom cases available only through Falcon Northwest feature state-of-the-art testing and design to ensure that every component is performing at their best through thermal imaging and rigorous lab testing designed and overseen by the Falcon Northwest founder himself. With a complete lineup of systems ranging from small to large, every Falcon Northwest system includes a 3-year warranty policy and a year of 2-way overnight shipping coverage, providing the ultimate peace of mind. To see all that Falcon Northwest has to offer, follow the sponsored link in the description below. Let's see if we can do this in almost a chronological order. So prior to 50 series even launching, 4080 and 4090 became very difficult to find months leading into 50 series. I mean, we could go back to like September, October of last year, where people were like, hey, wait a minute. Why is 4090 going for like $2,500+ again? And to understand that, you'd have to back up all the way to 30 series and 40 series launch. We did a video where we specifically shared the audio that Jensen was saying to the shareholder meeting, which is like thousands of people on the phone call. If you own stock in Nvidia, you have right to those shareholder meetings. And so he was basically discussing like, now we've got a problem with too much inventory with 30 series, so we're gonna be adjusting availability with our channel partners to normalize the market. And for normalized market to someone like Nvidia means create demand. And how do you create demand is you create scarcity. So I think what they've learned from this time around, where when 40 series launched, it was expensive, people were very upset with the performance uplift was huge. People were very upset with the pricing. I mean, it was $1,600 for a 4090, it was $1,200 for a 4080. So people were like, screw it, I'll just stay on my 3080 for longer, or my 3070 or whatever. Because they were readily available too, people would just be like, you know what, I'm not gonna buy 40 series, I'm gonna go buy a 30 series card. They were actually selling for slightly under MSRP at the time because, like Jensen said in his meeting, there was too much inventory, which let that sink in when it comes to a manufacturer saying there's too much of it. So I feel like to lead into 50 series issues, I think Nvidia learned. And so that's why we saw 4080 and 4090 become very difficult to find on shelves, because they stopped seeding e-tailers and retailers and slowed up production to retool for 50 series and create a demand by having a period of difficult to find graphics cards. So scalping became a thing again. If you had one, it was like gold. You could command a premium because people would pay it. So 50 series launched, which brings us to problem number 2 with 50 series. Number 1 is the artificial scarcity by intentionally having a huge gap, not an overlap of product, but a gap of product availability. They launched the card January 30th. The dates are weird in my head because the embargo was so far ahead. Guess what happens at that time? Chinese New Year. And if you guys aren't aware of what Chinese New Year is, apparently you take like 60 days off or something like that in Asia. Now, these facilities don't just close during Chinese New Year. A lot of the people that run these facilities, like Foxconn and TSMC and all these other places, they straight up live in other villages and communities away from the factories, and they travel to the factories and work there for days, weeks, months at a time, and then go home for a short period of time and come back. So during Chinese New Year and these Chinese holidays, they leave and go back to their families and their villages and their cities and their homes to enjoy their family time. So that's why these facilities are literally barely operating. So what does that mean? That means you are not getting ramped up availability. You are not getting ramped up inventory that is making its way to e-tailers, retailers, and obviously from Asia over to North America or down to Australia or to Europe or East Asia, wherever. They're just sitting. The machines are barely moving. So that is the reason why scarcity is an issue. I don't believe, personally, and this is tinfoil hat, I don't believe Nvidia did this on purpose to try and create a scalping issue, because Nvidia doesn't make any extra money on scalping. The AICs, or the add-in card partners like MSI and Gigabyte, Asus, PNY, all of them, Paylett, they buy the parts for the same price from Nvidia. Nvidia makes the same amount of money whether they sell that card, that GPU to the manufacturer at their normal price, and then the normal manufacturer sends it or sells it at MSRP or a slight markup, whatever, and then the scalper makes all the extra money. It's not like that money goes back to Nvidia. So there's a lot of people upset about the scalping prices, rightfully so. I mean, why wouldn't you be? But I don't think that Nvidia is benefiting from the scalping thing. But unfortunately, for the consumers, the scalping is not stopping people from buying, either from scalpers or from e-tailers and retailers, because the MSRP pricing obviously was a huge jump, which brings us to problem 2.5, which is pricing, right? So 5090 went from $1,600 to $2,000 MSRP for the Founders Edition card and whatever other MSRP cards are going to exist out there. And then 80 series card went from $1,200 to $999. But if you look at pricing right now, like what people are really getting for them, you can, like at Micro Center, they were selling for their MSRPs of the manufacturer. So if it's like a custom card that costs $2,300 from Asus or whatever, that's what Micro Center sells it for. The first time it gets sold, it stays at that price, and then it's probably listed within 15 minutes on Marketplace for double that, right? But anyway, $999 for a 5080, which is actually more like a 4080 Ti Super. Or 40, yeah, I guess technically a 4080 Ti Super. We didn't have a 4080 Super. At $200 less MSRP sounds like a good thing, except for when you look online, they're going anywhere between $1,800 to $2,500 for an 80 series card, which is absolutely bonkers. That's all economics, though. That's outside the realm of problematic for consumers, because once stuff does hopefully normalize after Chinese New Year, when we start to see big restocks coming, hopefully, that should fix the scalping problem, or at least alleviate a lot of it, because more availability means less opportunity for scalping. So that's just time is what we need for that. The bigger issue here is that the first round of tariffs went into effect. The first 10% on electronics went into effect. And that's why you saw a price jump about 3 days after the launch on January 30th. Right around February 2nd or 3rd is when you saw the first price increase at e-tailers and retailers, because that 10% tariff went into effect. But it goes into effect at the import level. So for instance, any of that inventory that was already imported into the US and went through customs doesn't have the tariff applied. Anything that was in transit and hadn't crossed and cleared customs yet has the tariff applied. So that's why you saw a delay, even though February 1st is when that 10% tariff went into effect. You didn't see it for a couple of days, because that's the lag between those container ships making their way to actual port of entry and then getting the tariff applied. So that's problem number 3, the price increase already due to tariffs, which we know gets passed off onto the end user. And unfortunately, when we talk about scalping as a factor of X formulation, a 10% tariff really ends up being about 20% extra added to the cost once scalped. So it kind of sucks. So that was problem number 3, obviously the increased price due to the first round of tariffs, and who knows what's coming next. But everything we've discussed so far is economics. That's pricing and availability, supply and demand. Very simple for most people to understand. Unfortunately, some people watching this video don't understand simple stuff. I'm not talking to you, I'm talking to everyone else. So moving on, now we're gonna talk about some of the initial problems that are starting to rear their ugly head when it comes to the hardware itself. So this is where the timeline becomes a little muddied, because the things are overlapping and it takes time for communication to happen. News stories get picked up or people to post on Reddit. The first one we kind of saw was 5090D and 5090s in China, starting to brick themselves on the latest 572.16 driver. And I say latest, I haven't seen if there's a new one yet, but 572.16 driver, which is the only driver available for 50 series cards and newer, causing black screens and other issues where the card would either just need a DDU or maybe even something a little bit more aggressive than that to try and get it to work again, all the way to just straight up not working anymore at all. Then it started to make its way into the US and other markets with that problem happening. I think we saw it in the China market first because by the time the cards launched on our end, the first 50 spots on the leaderboard of 3D Mark Port Royal was all Chinese. It was all like Chinese flags everywhere. So they obviously had a lot of early access to it. So I think they had a lot of extra time involved with it. Now these are a lot of the manufacturers, employees at manufacturers that were playing around with the cards and stuff, uploading their scores on day one, which is why I saw scores that went back all the way to like January 21st on there, even though it wouldn't accept our score, it accepted theirs for whatever reason. So they had lead time to start messing with their cards. And once the official driver came out, that's when they were the ones on day one. There was already a whole market of cards in the wild, which showed the problems there. Now, as we know, the problems were affecting not only 50 series, but also 40 series cards as well when it comes to the weird driver issues. Nvidia has still been pretty quiet about that one. Not a whole lot of response. Then inevitably, the first photo of a melted cable came out, which immediately sparks debate and drama as to why. That's the one that had the bubbly insulation on there, which was almost like, which I guess technically was a false alarm because when the reviewer, which was a review outlet, I can't remember which outlet it was, we put it on the screen right here, said, hey, we have our first melted connector, but they found that it actually had melted on a 4090, and then they reused it on a 5090 and then like noticed it later kind of a thing. So it was like, oh, false alarm, 4090 strikes again. Then about less than a week later, we see the first melted, like truly melted connector on both ends, which again, sparks all the drama and all the debate. User error, user error. This guy's like, no, it's not user error. I have been a PC enthusiast for decades. I know what I'm doing. I know how to make sure my cables are plugged in, but it is a third-party cable, which let's have a sidebar discussion here real quick. Every single cable is a third-party cable to the manufacturers because all they provide you is an adapter. That adapter, and nowhere in the warranty does it state if you use anything other than the adapter that your warranty isn't covered. That was a debate and a discussion that came up in 40 series, and Nvidia has already said they will warranty any, not just Nvidia FEs, but like the manufacturers as well that are also doing business under Nvidia's name with the GTX and RTX type names, I should say GeForce in that matter. They will warranty the card if it has a connector failure, as long as it's a certified third-party cable. The problem is not many people advertise their cables as quote unquote certified. So that brings up the debate once again. I'm just gonna put this out there. No, you are not intended to only use the adapter that comes with it. That adapter is just the new version of the old Molex ones you used to get with the PCI Express 8-pin and 6-pin connectors when PCIe like 2 and 3 and all that came out and was newer, and people still had just had Molex plugs and older power supplies that didn't have PCI Express plugs to give you compatibility to be able to run your card. That is not the only intended cable to be used. And I see people out there regurgitating a bunch of absolute horseshit, stating that if you use anything other than the adapter, that you are out of spec. That is not true. You are wrong. Please do us all a favor and shut the fuck up. Moving on, as long as you're using the power supply cable that was supplied with your power supply, you should feel pretty safe in using the cable to be considered certified. But if you go into like AliExpress or Temu or Amazon and you order replacement cables, that is where you may end up running into a problem. Because if you do have a power plug cable with your 30 series or your 40 series and 50 series, Nvidia and whoever is doing the warranty, AICs, usually want the cable with it. They want the card and the cable. And yeah, unfortunately, penny pinchers and such, they want to find any reason they can to deny your warranty. So do yourself a favor and use certified cables. Don't do like me. All of my test benches are using Amazon cables. So don't do like I do. Just do as I say, not as I do, because I'm running cheap cables on our PMD2 and all that. Which kind of brings us to, I guess, problem number 4 at this point. Or 5, I lost count, whatever. That's
not a good sign. You're losing count.
I know. And we are 13 days into this launch, people. 13
oh my God, that's good.
13 days. It launched on the 30th. It is February 12th. So anyway, even the Founders Edition card. So the Founders Edition card is a 575 watt card. It has a 4% additional power limit available to it, which puts it to 600 watts, theoretically. So the problem is when you connect it to our hardware monitoring device, which is a physical connection device that measures the amp and current going through the cable, shows that it's pulling more than 600 watts. It's pulling, like the Founders Edition cards pull like 615, maybe 620, sometimes spiking 630, which is out of spec for the cable. Now you can, I guess, DeBauer talked about this. They're rated up to technically like 640. Our PMD2 device is only rated to like 615 continuous. So whenever we put a Founders Edition card on there and push the power limits, or we put any of the aftermarket cards on there, like the Astral LC that we did, or even the Zotac card, those have additional power limits from the factory. So they're higher than 575 out of the factory. They're like 600 out of the box and still have an additional power limit. It starts alarming at us and beeping at us, basically telling us, bro, you're out of spec. You're now in potential damage territory. And by potential damage, it means damaging the PMD2, not necessarily the cable, but the PMD2. The other thing I see people talking about that they don't understand is the transient spikes that exist within the 12-volt high power cable, and specifically 5090, that can reach 900 watts. Now that is actually, believe it or not, within spec of the card's design. What makes it in spec is how long those transient spikes exist, and they should only exist for a few milliseconds. In fact, the transient spikes are so quick, the polling rate at which we poll is not capable of actually measuring that high that quick. It's possible when I see it spike like 630, 635, we could be capturing it on the way up or on the way down. But either way, those transient spikes are within spec. So I see people going, they pulled 900 watts, something's wrong. It's like, no, you just don't understand the transient spikes that exist with the power. But that's the era we live in now, where these things can start pulling ridiculous amounts of power instantaneously. And those transient spikes on a low, like, quality power supply, okay, power problem number 5 or whatever, those transient spikes, if they're not properly, if it's not properly designed PSU, can actually trigger OCP, or overcurrent protection. So you get the transient spike that happens, the power supply detects it, doesn't exactly know what's happening or why, and then it shuts down your PC. I see a lot of people mentioning that these days on shutdowns with their 5090s. You're more than likely need to upgrade your power supply to a true PCIe 5 or 5.1, just because of the transient spike issue. Let's now go on to problem number 6, specifically regarding DeBauer's video of testing his Founders Edition card that he built a water cooler for, because he actually has the melted connector, the melted Founders Edition card, and the melted power supply all in hand. The ones that made the rounds on Reddit, because that guy was in Berlin, DeBauer is in Germany, they are close together, they were able to coordinate to get together so DeBauer could do some testing and stuff on it, or at least some observation. He didn't want to tear it down because that stuff still needs to get sent in for warranty, so he didn't do any tear down, he just did surface inspection on it. But what he noticed is that one cable was very, very, very hot.
You can clearly see how 2 of the wires are getting warm and the rest isn't. That is extremely unusual. Switching again to the PSU side, it is above 140 degrees Celsius on some of these after 4 minutes.
We've seen the power supply end on 40 series and 4090 fiascos have sporadic issues where they saw it on the power supply side and maybe not the GPU side, but it's rare to see it on both sides. If you see it on both sides, it's very unlikely to be a user error where it's not plugged in all the way. That's likely to just be an amp current problem with the dynamic of the hardware. So he noticed that, and that got him thinking. Like, he decided to do some checking with his system, and he found that 2 wires specifically were pulling up to 23 amps through one wire. And then remember there's 6 12 volt and 6 ground and 4 sense wires when it comes to the 12 volt pin design, or the 12 pin design. He found that 2 of them were pulling significantly high. They're only supposed to be pulling like 8 to 9 amps, 8 or 9 amps. I almost said 89 amps, no, 8 to 9 amps. 6, maybe 7 under normal gaming conditions, but full load, like for mark, it shouldn't be pulling more than like 8 or 9. 23 on one alone, 2 on the one next to it. Now here's the crazy thing about that. The bus design on the power connector on the Founders Edition card has individual pins that are soldered to a solid bus rail. So it's a solid 12 volt bus and a solid ground bus with the pins soldered to them. So either something was wrong on that solder joint on the card end, or potentially on the power supply end. because he's using a Corsair HX 1600i, I use the 1500i, that's the biggest one we could get here in the US. He's in Germany, so he has better power distribution than we do. But we have the same cable that goes from a 12 volt to a dual 8-pin PCI Express on one side with very heavy gauge wire in between. It's very hard to bend, it's very thick. But that has me wondering if maybe something is wrong on the other end, because he found that, on the PSU end, because he found that 2 of his wires, the most inner ones, were insanely hot, 150 C plus, which is like, if he had held it there any longer, it would have melted for sure. It only took 1 minute of using thermal imagery under load to see those cables start to glow. And then it was pulling like 90 C or something on the card end and 151 C, I think, on the power supply end. And he went, I hadn't even realized that it was doing that. So he's gonna be investigating more. I can tell you for us, we've tested this card extensively, more than we've ever tested any card because of our new testing methodologies, which hopefully you guys are appreciating, because we have more we want to do. We want to sort of like scaffold how we approach that. But I even showed a thermal image where in our overclocking video, I was like, dude, these cables are getting warm. Like they were warm to the touch. And I used my thermal imaging camera and you could see the whole cable was glowing. Now, they weren't like that hot. It was in like the mid 40 C, which is acceptable, well within spec. But on 40 series cards, even 4090 at 450 watts or even overclocked, we never saw them glow that warm versus everything else in the environment. So ours was not like 1 or 2 wires getting hot, it was uniform. So power draw and the 12 volt high power connector, in my opinion, or the 12 volt 2x6, the revised one, which is what's in here, is still a problem. I think the 90 series cards needed 2. I said that from day one. I think I even said that with 4090, they should have had 2. Which, if they do that, then it's almost like they're using the same amount of space now as if you still had just stuck to PCI Express before, and so I don't know if they'll do that, but that's what needs to happen with those. Now, ironically, the brand that everyone loves to hate, Asus, their Astral card specifically, I don't think TUF does, I think only Astral does per pin sense. What I mean by that is it can actually monitor each of the 12 volt pins to determine what the amps and power draw through each individual pin is. In fact, I just saw a post today on Reddit where someone has the Astral card and the GPU Tweak 3 software told them, warning, one of your pins is getting way too hot, not too hot, but actually drawing too much amps, which would equate to too hot. So he shut his system down and went online and was like, what should I do? And here's the sad part. Use your error. When he goes through all the things he's tested and checked, he specifically points out, everything is seated. I double checked, I triple checked, power supply end, graphics card end. I don't know what to do. It's telling me something is hot or out of spec when it comes to the pin delivery. It could still be the power supply side. Now, the crazy thing is that per pin load balancing is not a thing with 50 series, unless you're actually running a very expensive Asus ecosystem, because as much as you guys know our opinion of some of Asus's dealings in the past, they make some pretty damn good stuff. And if you buy the $3,000 Astral card, or $2,800 air-cooled one, or $3,400 water-cooled one, it has per pin sensing, and if you run their new Thor V3 power supply, it does load balancing. Which is kind of something I think we need these days. We need smarter power supplies that are capable of monitoring each one of these pins and actually load balancing. The problem is, now you have to build something that's technically out of PCI SIG spec, because that is adding another layer of design, implementation, and engineering that is outside of spec to be able to load sense and balance and do all that. So remember, like I said, this just goes into a bus. When it's all connected to one bus, it has no idea what's happening individually, so they have to individually go into the PCBs and then go through a monitoring system and all that, which adds a lot of design complexity, but it's neat. Like, we love tech around here. That's a cool thing. I can't wait to get my hands on that and really play around with it. I saw it for a moment on my friend Ali's card with the Astral LC, but unless you have their power supply end to kind of like complement it, you don't get that load balancing. So that is that's kind of where we are today, and I think we're only seeing the beginning of people mixing and matching 12V 2x6 cards with ATX 3.0 12 volt high power supply ends. I have a feeling we're going to start seeing them melting on the power supply side more than we're going to see them melting on the GPU side going forward. The problem is that when you're pulling the amps, and the amps are exceeding because of resistance, which a badly seated pin or a pin that didn't fully seat all the way, or one that's kind of expanded a little bit or broken or whatever, that resistance pulls across the entire line, not just at the point. That's where it's going to get hottest first, but if you don't notice it, it can heat up the entire line. So even though the problem can be on the power supply side, it can still damage a GPU. So, hooray, that's where we are today. I'm calling it now, and I don't think it takes a genius to predict this one. I think we're going to start seeing power supplies hurt, like more damage on the power supply end than on the GPU end with 5090 users in the future. But if the forums that I lurk on have taught me anything, you guys are rooting for that. Apparently, you guys want anyone that went out and spent money on a 50 series card to watch their investment go up in flames. That's kind of fucked up, to be honest, whether it's because you wish you had one or you're just jealous or you're just mad at the whole situation. Don't wish crap on other people. We're better than that around here, so we don't join you in that behavior. But we are going to get the popcorn ready.